Okay. Let's see. It's something, I guess. Well, welcome to this late course introduction to the course. Or I should not say course introduction, because I hope that all of you have already watched the course introduction. Have you? Yeah, good. Because I will not say the things I say in this one once again. And that's because I knew that this morning would be quite stressful. So my name is Johan Leitet, and I'm not usually teaching in Växjö. I'm in Kalmar, the Kalmar department, or Kalmar part of Linnaeus University. So I need to commute every Wednesday to get here. So I commute by bus, to the train, to the train, to the bus, to the bus, to here. So there's a lot of problems, or a lot of things that could go wrong on the way here. And it did today. I missed the bus in Växjö. So every Wednesday I will try to be here. In the course we have the Slack channel that I talked about in the course introduction. And in the Slack channel I will post an update if I'm late. So I did that this morning, so that you will know what's happening. We also try to stream all the lectures on YouTube, because I know that, I mean, you are like 44 or something like that, 45 in the classroom right now, and you're supposed to be like 70, something like that. I don't know how they think that 70 persons fit in this room, but hey, I'm not the one in charge of admitting students. So it's a good thing that almost everybody has a share. We miss one share right now, I think. But you can always be sure that we will try to stream all the lectures on YouTube as well. So if you're not attending in the classroom, you will always have the option to watch all lectures streamed live on YouTube. And during the lectures, if you have any questions, I will answer them in, please ask the questions in Slack, and I will answer them on the lecture. I will have a look in Slack and try to answer all questions live. However, the setup right now is a little bit clunky for me. I hope I could get everything set up when we start the real lecture in 20 minutes. So this first part, I just want to get you up to speed. If you have any questions about the course after you watched the introduction, just wanted to say that I commute so that you know that if I'm late. It's not only me that will be the teacher on this course. I will hold the lectures, and you will meet me most of the time. But I have a colleague in Kalmar, Mats Lock, who will also be part of the course management, and you will meet him on the examinations or the oral hearings in the course. Since I'm a part of the Kalmar team and not the Växjö, you know, Kalmar and Växjö got together in 2010, and we have a lot of cultural differences in how we do things, like teach and what kind of systems we use. You are probably familiar, most of you, at least if you have studied at LNU before, you're familiar with Moodle. We do not use Moodle in Kalmar. We use CoursePress, which actually is just a simple WordPress blog, just presenting the information. And then we try to use other tools like YouTube, Slack, GitHub, Git, to do source control of code, or communicate through Slack. Skype for the oral hearings if you are not participating on campus. So why I'm telling you this is that it's good for you to know, if you're used to the way courses are in your program, this might be a little bit different. You are probably familiar with written exams in the end of the course. We do not do that. We have oral hearings instead. So during this course, you will have 3 oral hearings. You will make 3 examination assignments, and every assignment will be corrected with an oral hearing, or we will have an oral hearing where you have half an hour together with me, Mats, probably John or Jacob. We'll see about that, 2 other teachers. But where we will question you on your code and question you on the theory in the course. So it's not only good to produce code, you also need to learn the theory, and we will have a discussion regarding the theory, and then you will get a grade on how you perform on the oral hearing. You can do the oral hearing remotely over Skype or here in Växjö in some of the conference rooms that we will book. Some of you, I'm not sure if Mats will be able to go here on Wednesdays when we have the oral hearings, and in that case Mats will be over Skype and you will have to do it over Skype, some of you, but you will be able to choose that. So you will book your own time slot for the oral hearings, and then you will know if it's over Skype or over in an office. So I think that will work out fine. It did last year, so I'm pretty confident that it's not a problem. Do everybody here have their own computers? Okay, so everybody is like, somebody might not have computers, or am I wrong? Okay, so I hope that everybody has their own computers, because in this course we're going to use a lot of tools, and those tools are not that easy to get installed on the university computers. So if you don't have a computer that you can install the programs we need in the course on, please contact me on email or on Slack so we can find some kind of solution for you. In Kalmar, all of our students always have their own laptops. We have that as a prerequisite to be able to even take the courses. I don't think you do in Växjö, so that's why I'm asking. I have a couple of minutes for questions before I need to try to get everything working here, because you are not able to see the screen well, you are on the camera, but that will not be good enough in the long run. I can say that as well, because every lecture is streamed. If you go into today's lecture, the first one is about HTML, you will find the content for the lecture here. You will find the presentation here. You will find last year's recording here. So, I mean, if you want to study ahead, go ahead. You have the recordings from last year here. So you can just watch them on YouTube if you like. I can warn you that today's lectures, they will be pretty similar to last year's. So that's no different. However, we have changed some things regarding the tools for the JavaScript development part. So things regarding tools in recorded lectures will not be the same as I will show you this year. However, I mean, the language, JavaScript, programming in JavaScript, all of those things are exactly the same. But the tools are slightly different this year. Just bear in mind. And to every lecture you will find resources that I talk about and whatever. So everything is on the course page. You shouldn't need to get the information from somewhere else. Slack is only used for communicating with each other and communicating with us in the course management. Please use English in the Slack channel, because most students here are international students, so English is the preferred language. Of course, if you speak directly to me or Mats, Swedish is fine. But just in the Slack channel, please use English. Questions? Yep.
What components of the GitHub education have to be used?
Good question. I'm not sure you need any component actually, but you need to sign up for GitHub education. Or do you? I'm not even sure you need to actually.
If you want
Yeah, you will get unlimited. You get a lot of like good things from signing up, but we will provide you with private repositories to use for the course. However, it could be nice to have some private repositories for your own as well. And you get a lot of programs and things, but actually, if you're not studying at our program, I mean, we will, in the study program that this course stems from, we will use like Travis and DigitalOcean and things like that. But for that, just this and the next course, I don't think actually that you need GitHub education. But I mean, you are students and you will get it for free. So, and if you already have a GitHub account, just add the student email to that account, and you will get GitHub education on your account. You don't need to create a new account. Other questions? I think that is it for now. I need this 15 minutes to get everything up and running, I think. Hopefully it will work. And then after the break, like you've been sitting for 10 minutes now, need a break, we will get into the first, I mean, this course is divided into 3 parts. The first part is HTML and CSS. Many of you probably know HTML and CSS. I know that many of you don't. So we will start with HTML and CSS. However, HTML is pretty easy. CSS can be as hard as you like. But we will try to compress it to just 2 lectures. You will do 1 assignment. And then we will use HTML and CSS as a support for creating web applications. And so that is part 2 and part 3 of the course. And those are the heavy parts in the course. This first part is, or at least last year they thought that the first part was the easy one. And part 2 and 3 are a little bit more time consuming. And I think I said it in the introduction, but if I didn't, remember that this period is 9 weeks. The first period of the semester is 9 weeks. And the second one is 11 weeks. You have the you are unfortunate enough to have this course on 9 weeks instead of 11. This course is designed for 10 weeks. So you will do a 10-week course on 9 weeks. The students taking this course the next period will take a 10 weeks course on 11 weeks. Of course, they will have an easier task. You will need to work more hours on a week. That's just how it is. I'm not to blame. Someone else is to blame. I can't help it that it is that way, but it is. However, how many here has signed up for the following course? This is the 5-to-5 introduction. Then we have a survey-based course following. Okay, so some of you are taking the survey-based course. And the survey-based course is also designed for 10 weeks, but you will take that on 11, and the students in Kalmar will take that one on 9. So, yeah, it's a lose and win situation. And that's good to know. I mean, we have students in Kalmar. They are taking those courses kind of in study programs. However, this first course is a compression of 2 courses in Kalmar, because we have like an introduction to HTML and CSS as one course, and introduction to programming as one course in JavaScript. However, the prerequisites for this course is that you all know how to program or write code, like in Java or C# or in any other object-oriented language. So we will not like start over with if statements and for loops and such. We will just show how it works in JavaScript. So we can compress 2 courses into 1. Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of things to say, but I need a little break to just get things started, and I see you in like 10 minutes, okay? Okay, welcome back to this first lecture in the course. Actually think everything is working. On the stream, if you have any questions, I will not be able to answer them on YouTube. You need to, or the YouTube comment field, you need to go into the Slack channel for the course and ask your questions there. Of course, anyone in the audience is also allowed to ask questions in Slack if you like, or just raise your hand as usual. So, today's topic is HTML. I would like to see some hands in the air. How many of you have done something in HTML and CSS? So that is like 70%, I would say, something like that. Okay, good. I used to teach HTML and CSS, but that was a couple of years ago. Since then, I've left like those parts of the web development community. I'm more active in the JavaScript and web application development community now. However, HTML is like this technique that, I mean, it's always there. If you're writing web applications, you will always need to know how to write proper HTML, because that is one of the foundations of the web. So in this course, we will have a brief introduction to HTML. We will have a brief introduction to CSS, which is like the presentation layer. And then we will focus on building web applications. But the first part of the course is HTML and CSS, and we will start out today with that. Let's see, where is the screen? There. I would like, because this is the first lecture I have for you, I would like to just point out that all materials in the course is published under the Creative Commons license. So if anyone likes, they are free to use this lecture or materials or exercises or whatever as they like. They just need to like reference us. And that could be good for all of you to know that all the materials, all the content is publicly accessible. So you could watch this on YouTube, you can find the material on the course page. You could, if you see errors in my slides, if you know your way around GitHub, you could always like do a pull request on my slides, and I urge you to do so. And your name will be forever engraved in the lecture. So please do if you find some errors. However, many of you, how many has worked with Git and GitHub or Bitbucket or whatever before? Okay, so some of you, like 30%. Most of you are new to Git and GitHub. Git and GitHub are like version source control for code. Subversion is like something that was used commonly before, not so much anymore. Git is the main player right now. We will use Git in the course. There are guides on the course webpage how to get started with Git. So follow those guides and get acquainted with Git and GitHub. I mean, those tools will be, if you're thinking of a career as a programmer, you will need to be familiar with those tools because they are used like everywhere. So even if the company you will work at or your own company or startup will use some other version control, it's kind of the same thing. So you need to be able to work structured with code in that way. So please, in the beginning of the course, if you feel like you have like spare time because the course is maybe a little calmer, more calm in the end, in the beginning. So use that free time or spare time to get you acquainted with Git. And please do pull requests if you can. So today we will talk about the web as a platform, because many of you have a background in Java maybe and programming Java applications and desktop applications. So I will talk briefly about the web as a platform. And which protocols are the ones that are important. We will, of course, look at HTML, how to structure documents using HTML, and some things to look out for. I will not stand here today and go over every element or property in the specification. That would be one boring lecture. I mean, after the lecture you will get references to places where you can look that up as you go. We will though have an overview of what we call tags, but that's just an overview. Okay, so this is kind of like a picture that I always show, because it's when you work on the web, this simple model is just a must know, the client-server model. Probably most of you are familiar with this kind of architecture, simple architecture, but on the web this is essential. On my right side we have the server, and on the left side in this example we have the browser or the client. And the client is often, when we talk about web and HTML, the client often is a browser. However, that is changing. I mean, the browser is equal to Chrome, Firefox, Edge, Safari. However, modern web applications are often executed in different environments, as regular applications on your computer. If you install Slack, for instance, Slack in itself is a web application, but it's executing as a Windows or OS X, Mac OS program or Linux program. But the client in itself corresponds to this model. So we have the client on one side. The client requests web pages from the server, and the server responds back to the client. And that is the foundation of the web. In the early days, I mean, this was the model. And we only have simple requests and simple responses. All of this has changed the last years, so we have a lot of more protocols, more advanced protocols. We can do streaming and things like that, but we will in this lecture just focus on this simple request and response model. So the client, when you write an URL, the client requests a document from the server, and the document is an HTML document, and the server responds with a document, and there are links in the document that forces the client to do other requests, like getting an image or getting a style sheet or getting some JavaScript or whatever. And those requests could even be sent to other servers, not just our server. We will, in this course, focus entirely on the client. It's an introduction to web programming. In Kalmar, this course corresponds to a course in Kalmar called client-based web programming. So we will do programming on the client. However, for you taking the next course, the 1DV 523, you will focus your resources on the server instead. So that's the server-based web programming course, of course. Together, if you put those two together, you can do pretty much whatever kind of web applications you like. The server is needed to do things like authentication, save user data, things like that. Today we can do a lot of things on the client, but in reality you will most often need a server as well. I said that the client could be applications on the desktop. Of course, the client could be mobile applications as well, packaged for the App Store or Google Play, for instance, if you like. That's getting a good traction now, and many of the apps you are using on your phones today are actually written with web techniques in the foundation or in the bottom. Okay, just a conception, and I want you to have the terminology right. The web isn't the internet. You need to separate those two words. The web is certain protocols built upon internet, and internet is the infrastructure. You might know this, but many get it mixed up. It's getting harder and harder to define what a web application is. If we go back in time, it was pretty simple. Okay, so it's HTML pages served using the protocol HTTP. So that's web pages or web applications. However, new protocols emerge. We don't necessarily use HTTP for all our web applications anymore. We have other protocols in play, WebSockets, for instance. But we will use the internet as like the foundation and build web applications upon internet. So these are the protocols that we will get in touch with. How many of you are taking the network security program? Yeah. You are pretty familiar with the top two, I guess. You probably know the TCP/IP model or OSI model by heart. I did once. I don't need to anymore because I could more or less forget about those two protocols, the internet layer and the transport layer protocols that handles traffic on the internet. I can focus on application layer protocols, that is HTTP. And HTTP is the foundation of the web. That is the protocol that is used to serve web pages. The version 1.1 is the old one. We have a newer version of the HTTP protocol called 2 that are gaining ground. If you look at Facebook and Google and those kind of players, they are have converted to HTTP 2 today. However, HTTP 1 is probably the one that is most used still. In this course, we do not need to focus that much on which HTTP protocol that we are using, if we are using 1 or 2. However, in the next course, we will have a bigger discussion again regarding HTTP 2 and the differences between those protocols. However, when writing client-side applications, sometimes you need to make choices. There are good practices and bad practices. And something that is good practice in HTTP 1 could be a bad practice in HTTP 2. And I will, more or less throughout this series of lectures, I will always point out that, okay, so it's a good practice to do this. However, if you are using HTTP 2, you might be thinking about doing it this way instead. So I just want to make you aware that there is a difference between HTTP 1 and 2. We have on the application layer, we have this secure layer as well. You know it with the extension of S to HTTP when you write a web address or URL to get an encrypted layer upon HTTP. This is, of course, something that is important. It is important today to have encrypted pages or encrypted communication. Google, for instance, will punish you in a bad way. If you don't use HTTPS, you will get lower in the search result page, basically, if you're not using HTTPS. Or, as they will say, they will get you a bonus if you are using HTTPS. That's another way of saying it. But I mean, when I started out, when we built CoursePress, for instance, the web pages that we use for the course, that was in 2012, 5 years ago. Back then, it wasn't like I mean, HTTPS, you used HTTPS when you used some kind of username and password, logins, for instance, when you log in users. So we use HTTPS when you're logged in, and we use HTTP when you're not logged in. And that is because of performance, because back then, making a secure connection was costly in resources for the server. Therefore, you try to like only use a secure layer when you really needed it. That has changed. Today, you don't think about that. You just try to default to using HTTPS everywhere. So, however, this is something that you need to consider on the server side. So we will not talk a lot about that in this course. However, I will probably mention that in this case, we are building a chat application. We should probably use a secure layer because we have communication that could be sensitive, for instance. But in the server course, you will set up HTTPS as well. We also have a new protocol, or new, it's not that new anymore, WebSockets. That is an application layer protocol. So you could, like, when you load a web page, you use HTTP to load the page to the user, but then you can switch to WebSocket for like real-time data. Like if you're creating a game, for instance, you probably want to sync all the players in this multiplayer game, then you would need a WebSocket to be able to do that. There are other techniques as well, but WebSocket is one that is common. Or if you want to do like real-time stock market prices or football results or whatever, you could use WebSockets. And we will do that in the course as well. So we will use WebSockets for some of the applications. This is pretty much it on protocols. So HTTP and WebSocket. Those protocols are the ones that you should know and will use in the course. And today we're talking about HTML, and then HTML pages are served using the HTTP protocol. So, brief history. And this will be a really brief history of the web. If you take the courses in Kalmar and the program, we have this in an extended version, but this will just be a brief overview. So, how many recognize this structure? Can you relate to what this is? Yeah, it's a web page. Do you know what these blue things are? Yeah, links or anchors or whatever. You know, this is the first web page that was published back in '93. Do you remember or anyone know who published this page? The name of the person? It's a Sir, since like 5 years, I think. Sir Tim Berners-Lee. So Tim Berners-Lee is the like inventor of the web. There were many others involved in like getting to this point, but in '93 he released this page and kind of told the world that he invented something that he called the World Wide Web. I mean, this is quite simple. I mean, he wanted to do this because he wanted to link like research documents together instead of needing to go to like a mainframe computer and run a program to get your research document. Why not just distribute the documents on researchers' computers all over the world and link them together using links? So that was kind of the vision for the web. However, what happened? Well, let's see. So when many of us got into the field of web development, that was in the early 90s. I wasn't that early because I used something called bulletin boards, BBSs. That was like the hot thing back in the early 90s, where you could like exchange images or ASCII images and chat to other persons. You call them on a modem. and then you could like communicate on a bulletin board, and then when you have written your message, you had to hang up so someone else could call in and write something, and yeah. So it was quite, I mean, it looked a little bit similar to the web, but it was nothing alike. However, so I was on the bulletin board side, I laughed at this. And the guys and girls in this side, they said, oh, this will be the future. And I was like, no, 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 we have the future here. It's the bulletin boards. I was wrong, of course. So I started working with web pages back in 97, I think, or 8 maybe. But if you did web pages in 94, it would look pretty much like this. You could add images, you could write something, and you could do this kind of list things you liked. Sorry, it's in Swedish, but it's just gibberish anyway. And you could do links to other pages. Typical web page in 94. However, Microsoft got into the business. They recognized that, oh, this web thing, that could be something interesting. We had a browser called Mosaic back then that were pretty commonly used. It later Netscape Navigator came into the picture, and Microsoft made a competitor called Internet Explorer. So back then, everybody like competed to get the best developers to develop web page. I mean, there wasn't that many web pages. So you wanted web pages that looked good in your browsers, so that users would use Microsoft browser or Netscape's browser. So what happened was that Microsoft thought, oh, maybe we could like add some cool stuff to our browser so that developers will use our browser. So they added like fancy backgrounds. And then Netscape, they said, oh, we want that as well. And we will add this cool thing. That made it so web pages looked like this in 96. You recognize them? Even if some of you are young, you've probably seen like, there are still pages like this, of course, on the web. So Fire was the fire. You needed fire on your pages. That was the coolest thing, to have like fire everywhere. And chandeliers, of some reason, I don't know why, but more or less every page has chandeliers. Running animals and spinning email signs. That was like things that got implemented or got support for those kind of things in the browsers, and that made the pages look like this. Often hard to read as well, because you had some kind of wallpaper background that was terrible. But this was when like amateurs and everybody like played around, and it looked like this. But what started to happen was that companies got interested in the web. They saw a possibility to like show themselves on web pages, show their company on web pages, reach customers. So companies came into the picture. They tried to like structure things a little bit better. So web pages started to look a little bit more like this, with like you needed some kind of menu to choose different parts of the company. You needed a little bit more structure, and you needed an efficient way of developing and developing the pages. Something called frames arose. Frames was a pretty clever way to like divide a web page into several parts. So we had a top frame and side frame and a main frame. So if we had like 10 pages, we didn't need to change the menu over and over again for every frame or every page. We could just change that one frame, and the result will reflect on all the pages. The only frame we needed to update was the middle one, because the header and the menu should look the same. However, the developers, they had this like big monitors. What was it, like 640 times 480 in resolution? And everything looked just great on their computers, on their monitors. And then a user with a lower resolution opened the page, and the menus like got under the main content, and often you needed to like scroll this page or the menu to see all the options. It was terrible. disabled people had a real problem with this kind of web pages, because if you're blind, for instance, you often use a screen reader that reads the information on the page for you, and the screen readers couldn't handle this kind of environment. In '99, search engines started to get really popular, so that you could search for keywords on a page. If you had and used frames, it wasn't that, or often you actually, if you found a Gubbergren, that search word, and you came to this page using the search engine, you would just see this mainframe. You wouldn't see like the top of the page, and you wouldn't see the menu, so you couldn't navigate anywhere. You just got this page, or you got the header of the page, which was totally meaningless. Frames had a lot of problems. It was popular back in '99 to like 2005 or something like that. Today it's like never use. It's removed from standards. It's something that we will not even look at. This is the only thing I will say about frames. I know some of you have probably worked with frames, find them convenient. However, there are much better ways to do things like this today. So frames is nothing that should be used. Okay, so we went forward like 5 years, and what happened was web pages started to look like this again. So back in 2003, 2004, when everything started to normalize, this like play period was over and the web became really serious, web pages started looking like this again. And this is actually what we will produce in this course as well, because this was what Tim Berners-Lee had in mind when he invented the web. HTML and web pages should only be information and structured information. How many of you have written a document in a word processor? I mean, like Word or Google Docs or whatever it's called for OS X. So it's like 5 out of 70 students have ever written a document in a word processor. Is that right? Okay, yeah, I'm not to judge. I mean, I guess sooner or later you will use a word processor and write like a thesis or something. Or you might write everything in. Are the rest of you writing in like Markdown? That would be, I would be impressed. But yeah, but you know, I mean, if you're writing in Microsoft Word, for instance, you will do a header and you will mark it as a header, and then you will write a paragraph, you will insert a picture, and this, I mean, I could have faked this in Word, right? It looks kind of like Word. And writing HTML pages and writing Word pages, it's completely the same thing. It's as simple as that. However, when I say pages look like this, it's not entirely true, right? Because this looks quite ugly. Pages are much nicer than this. And what I mean when I say that pages today and HTML today looks like this is that the things making it look beautiful, or at least trying to make it look beautiful, is style sheets and CSS. And that's after after lunch. So HTML is just producing this. Then we use CSS on top of this to make it look like whatever we like. So HTML is used for structuring information and linking information together, just like Tim Berners-Lee said in the beginning of the 90s. However, we have been on a long journey to get here again. But today in modern web development, you do a clear separation between the content of a page and the style of a page. And we will do that in this course as well. Later on, we will see that we will also add JavaScript to the mix to alter the behavior of the page, to make things happen. But that's later. Okay. I will use the terminology web pages and web applications. Have you heard me say home pages today? No, because I haven't. Home page is, for me, home page is like this word that I don't know how to say this without like breaking someone's heart. But for me, if someone say, oh, I build home pages, okay, so you are a homepage builder, great. If someone comes and say, oh, yeah, I'll build web applications, okay, you're a developer. So developers and homepage creators. A homepage in the beginning was, I mean, that was the homepage of a company or the homepage of a person or whatever. A web page is a more clear term. A web page is a page that is loaded over HTTP and uses web technologies to render. A web application, if we add to that, I would say, I often do this distinction. Web pages are like lnu.se, that's a web page. You go there, you seek information. It has some parts that we could maybe call application, like the lot on web where you register yourself. But I would call lnu.se like a web page. However, if you start Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, whatever, I would call those web applications because it's so much more than just an information page, a web page. Spotify, for instance, is created using web technologies. Even if you run it on your computer, it's web technologies in the background executing. So that is a web application. The goal for like the first part is to create a simple web page. That's part one of the course. Part 2 and part 3 is to create web applications. And in the following course, we will add a server side to those applications as well. Okay? I don't want to hear the word homepage. Yeah, right. Well, I will not punish you if you do that. So, how many of you have written programs in Java? That is like 80%. Some of you have probably written programs in C# or PHP, and yeah, many other languages and platforms. I mean, we could say that Java is a platform. I mean, you can do pretty much whatever you like in the Java platform. Today, you can write applications for desktop computers. You can write applications for Android phones. Can you write? You could probably write iOS applications in Java and convert them to run on iOS if you like. So Java is like this big platform. And the web has become a platform as well. And in many ways, with the web has starting to like become an operating system as well, or at least trying to compete with the operating system. If you look at Google Chromebook, for instance, it's of course a Linux operating system in the background, doing all the work with like hardware and stuff. But for the user and the user experience, it's more or less just a web browser experience and web applications running on the platform. And some, I guess, Android applications also in the like later versions. But so today, the web is such a capable platform that you could do more or less everything on that platform. You can play quite advanced games. You can do word processing. You can listen to music, watch videos. I mean, how many of you have an application, an installed application on your computer that you use to watch like videos on? Yeah, some of you have like Plex or something like that, maybe. But I mean, YouTube is, I mean, if I ask anyone on the street for a video application, they will probably mention YouTube, and that's a web application. So, and I mean, we're converting as well. I mean, Word was de facto standard back in the 90s. Today, I wouldn't say that Word is de facto standard. I would say that Word or Google Drive or some other web-based word processor is starting to gain ground, at least. We will treat the web as a platform in this course and try to explore like what you can do with the web as a platform. How many of you have worked with Internet of Things or come in touch with Internet of Things? Not too many. Okay. Internet of Things is like, okay, connected things. It could be a camera that is connected to the internet so you could watch your living room live. It could be this doorbell that is connecting and when someone is on the door. It could be sensors for heat. It could be light bulbs. It could be like everything. I mean, if you look at the industry right now, if something is hot and has been for the last year, it's Internet of Things. That is like just, if you go to a conference, you can be sure one of the topic will be Internet of Things, because connected things is the new big thing. I mean, it's not a new thing. Internet of Things is not new. I worked with a company that developed Internet of Things back in '96. And I mean, that is pretty long ago, but it's the last year it has been exploding. And a term that has come into play is something called the Web of Things. A problem with Internet of Things is that many manufacturers have their own protocols. So I mentioned that on the web we had HTTP protocol and the WebSocket protocol, more or less. But when it comes to Internet of Things, you have so many protocols, Zigbee and whatever they're called, Bluetooth and yeah, whatever, that just is used to connect things together. The problem with that is that things are not compatible. So a sensor from one distributor might not be compatible with the light bulbs that you have installed in that room, so that light bulbs cannot react to what's happening inside of the room or when the temperature change or whatever. One solution to this is use something called Web of Things, because we have the web, it's standardized, we use the same protocols. Why not use the web as an umbrella to get all those things talking to each other? And that is the concept of Web of Things. We've been starting to play around a lot with this. Many of you have probably tried to do things. There are a lot of like applications in this area if you want to connect your things at home. But this is also a thing for the web, that because today Microsoft and Firefox and Apple and Disney and Samsung and I mean you could probably name a tech company of size, and that tech company is in a group called the World Wide Web Consortium that Tim Berners-Lee is head of. Together, all of those companies are developing the web as the platform. Of course, there are some bigger players, like Google is one major player, Microsoft, Apple, and Mozilla. Those might be the like 4 main players. But everybody that wants to can be in this community, pay a fee. I mean, Microsoft pays a lot of money every year to have developers like sitting and working with just the web for free, but on the expense of Microsoft, and Google and all other doing the same thing. So the web is like this utopia, so to speak, that actually companies have come together now. It took a while. It took like until 2010 or something like that for all of those to get together and just go in the same direction, but they are right now. And that makes the web beautiful, I think, because everybody are free to use it. It's not any royalties involved, at least in most of the parts. There are some discussions still using video, but other than that, it's free and open, and everybody can contribute and use it as you like. Okay. So the goal of this course now is to create web applications and in the start web pages. And to do this, you need to start separating things. And I've shown you those simple web pages that we should like separate content from presentation. So let's have a look at, I could show an example actually, if you don't believe me. Well, where's my point? Oh, there it is. This one is a like classic web page that's been around since almost the 90s, I think. To just show what I mean by all web pages more or less looks the same. If we, I don't think I have any developer tools installed, so if we do something like, always hard to do this live. So I will just go in and alter some of the things in this page. Can I do it like this? No, I couldn't. Can I remove it like this then? I can't see. Is there a delete? Hide element. Ah, delete. There was. So hard to see. Oh, there. Yeah. So what I did now was just to remove the style sheets from this page. And voila. Looks kind of like the page I showed, right? It's some headers, some paragraphs, and a list of links. But as soon as we add the CSS on this one, everything changes. So what I can do is just, those are different CSS files. So the only thing that differs this page from the one we looked at before is that we have another design applied to this page. Okay? Could look like this. It could look like, okay, what was the first one? Steel. Okay, like that. It's exactly, if I remove the style sheet, it would look exactly the same. The simple HTML page. And now, I said in the beginning that HTML is simple and CSS can be as hard as you like, and now you see why. I mean, HTML is nothing harder than just writing a simple Word document. But adding the CSS, this is the tricky part. However, the important part, and this is a good thing, the important part is the HTML part, because that's where you set the structure and there you have the information. This is just like eye candy and like to attract your viewers or your users. Okay. Come on. Oh, neat. So the HTML is the structure is the same as the Word document. CSS or presentation or style sheets, that is adding styles to our pages. And on the later stages, we will also add behavior to the pages. And there is a reason why I have separated this. And that is because I want you to separate this as well. You could, if you like, you could just create one file and you can add all of your CSS right into that file and just throw in all of the JavaScript in the same file and you can get whatever result you want. You could like build Spotify that way. You will have a really hard time. The performance would probably be really bad, but you could. However, we should not do that. I think you are pretty used. If you have, I mean, you have a course in programming before, you have programming Java, you don't put everything in one big file. You try to separate classes, you try to like separate it so you get an organization so that many people can work with separate files and separate parts of your application. You should think exactly the same thing here. Separate, 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 separate HTML in files, separate presentation in different files, and separate behavior in different files. Separate them as much as you like. The important part is that you as a developer have a good support, that the team can work in a good way. After that, we could start thinking about delivering this to the user. Maybe we shouldn't deliver like 200 CSS files to the user. Maybe one is the optimal HTTP 1, or maybe 10 is optimal in HTTP 2. So we can think about that in later stages. So in the beginning, just think separate in logical parts. I will talk a lot about that. Yeah, before the break. I mean, this is what I'm talking about. So this is a simple word processor. What you do is writing headlines. okay, so how would you do this task? If I ask you to like indent this paragraph, how would you do that in a word processor? How many would place the marker and press space 10 times and then go to the next line and press space? And is that the right way to do it? Probably not. What you're doing, if you're doing that in a word processor, you are adding style into the content, right? So you want something to look in a certain way, and you do that by adding styles, adding more spaces. Or the classical one, okay, we need a headline. So we take like a normal text, we mark the headline, and we increase the font size, and we make it bold, and now we have a headline. Is that the correct way to do it? No. How do you do it? You mark it, and you tell that this is a header 3 or whatever. It's exactly the same thing when it comes to web pages. Why is it important? Because, I mean, if you do it like that I said first, that you just increase the size and make it bold, I mean, for a visitor that watches this page many hard words now, visually, it will look great. It will look like a header. However, when a search engine, and the search engines are, you can see them as blind persons. If a search engine enters the page, it will only see the normal text. So it will not recognize that this is a header. And it's important to tell search engines what is what, because the search engine will, if it's a header, the search engine will see like, okay, this is important. This is probably what this page is about. And that is information that you want to provide to the search engine so that the search engine could provide better results to the end user. Very important. And that's why, I mean, when you are developing pages, don't only look at this picture. Sometimes you need to step back, just remove the styling of the page and look at the bare HTML and make sure that it's okay. When you start to get used to writing HTML, that will be in your bones, so you will not have to do that. But at the beginning, it could be good to just get rid of the style sheets now and then. Okay, I get no questions on the distance. I will just repeat, if you have questions, please ask them in Slack. I monitor that one. So with that, after the break, we will start looking, this was more of an introduction. After the break, we will start looking at how to write HTML pages. Okay? 15 minutes. Okay, welcome back. So in the break, I got a question about every Wednesday I will be here at 9:30, hopefully, if the bus isn't late. And some of you have a lecture ending at 10. So, those 30 minutes between 9:30 or 45 minutes actually, between 9:30 and a 10:15, this is just, I am here. If you have any questions, I will try to be here at least, so you can always show up. So it's kind of a tutoring pass. However, I will also, because you're quite a few students taking this course, I will try to add another tutoring pass that will be held remotely from Kalmar over Skype, but I will try to add that so it will not interfere with this UML course that some of you are taking, the one DV607 or something like that. So watch out in the schedule. There will be another tutoring pass as well, tutoring lecture as well. Any other questions during the break? Yeah?
And today from 1 to 3 is just a normal day?
And today between 1 and 3 is just a normal day. I'm just repeating for the mic. It is. It's a lecture with CSS. Yeah, but it will be the same as last year, more or less. It's never the same, but the content is the same. Okay, I forgot one thing before the break. Just a brief overview over the standards that have emerged since the early 90s. You don't need to know them by heart, of course. I will not question you on dates and on when was the release date of CSS2. I just want to show you because it says something about how the web was developed. So back in the 90s, the web was born. In 93, the first web page was released, and HTML1 saw the daylight. However, the first real specification was the HTML2 in 95. CSS came a year later, so there was a year when you couldn't do any styling to web pages, and that's why a lot of those things happened, that Microsoft started adding like tags for blinking text and stuff like that. Okay, so the development went on. However, in the late 90s, something happened. And you are developers. You have developed in, say, Java. It would be really difficult to develop Java programs if you didn't have a compiler that told you when you wrote something wrong, right? It would be a hazard if that compiler instead guessed when something was, okay, you wrote one in the if statement. No, that is not a good. But say you wrote OFR instead of for, and the compiler kind of guessed that you mean the if, so it just inserted if instead, and didn't give you a warning or didn't give you an error. You wouldn't like to program in a language that did that. However, HTML do that. So even from the start, the web browsers kind of guesses what the developer writes and try to render that to the user. And in part, that's a good thing. That has probably been one of the reasons why the web has been successful, because everybody has been able to create web pages. Because you could just write something. If you don't care about HTML, you just write hello world, save the file, and watch it in the browser. The browser will present it as hello world. And that is because the browser will recognize, okay, you miss something, you miss a couple of things. This hello world should probably go in the content part of the page. Adds it there, adds every meta tag and every other part of the page for you. But as the web developed, real developers got into the picture and wanted to use this as a professional tool. And it's not a professional tool if you can't rely on how the web browser will present things. If the web browser starts correcting you, you will be quite mad. So the kind of emerged a new standard called the XHTML. How many of you have have marked up stuff in XML? Yeah, so some of you are familiar with XML, but XML is a standard for marking information or marking up data. Skärmsläcke. Screensaver, I hope. What? Strange. Apple is often quite good at not turning on screensavers when you're in a presentation. Okay, so XML is this really way of structuring data. It's really good at structuring things. So the World Wide Web Consortium thought that, so HTML looks kind of like XML, and that's because both stem from something called SGML, that is a meta language for other languages, and both HTML and XML stems from the same parent. So they thought, okay, so let's make it an XML application instead of an SGML application. With that, we could have this draconian error handling, so that if a developer doesn't comply to the rules, the developer gets an error message. And that was called XHTML, extendable HTML. So when I taught HTML back, I started in 2002, when I had classes in HTML, I said, okay, HTML 4.0 was the last HTML standard. It's XHTML that will be the future of the web. That was I was certain of that. Because it's good for developers. It's much easier when we get error messages. However, what happened was that it wasn't such a good idea to just add this error layer upon HTML. What would happen if, say that you develop a web page and you bring in an ad from another company, and this ad uses HTML, and there is an error in the HTML? Okay, your page will crash, and the user will see an error message saying, okay, you forgot to close the tag at line 98. I mean, it would be a disaster for Facebook if an ad just broke Facebook, right? Okay, there could have been ways around that, but what happened was that in the early 2000s, a group split from the World Wide Web Consortium. They said, we don't like this new heading of XHTML. We want a more open and free and experimental standard. They call themselves the WHAT working group, the WHAT working group, WHAT working group. And developers of Opera, the web browser Opera, the Norwegian web browser Opera, were in the front, and others joined. So they started working on another specification and say, okay, let's not let HTML4 be the last version. We start drafting in HTML5 or HTML next or whatever they called it. So they started in parallel to develop this new version of HTML, and the World Wide Web Consortium stuck to XHTML. However, in later years, somewhere in this region, 10 years ago, the groups got together and they committed that, okay, this HTML5 will probably be the future, XHTML will be cancelled, and HTML5 is the new thing we will look at. A big thing here was, for instance, video, the support natively for video in web pages. Before we had to rely on Flash or other plugins to show video, but in HTML5 we don't anymore. There are many other things in HTML5 that is new. They have new semantics. I will talk more about that today. We have more, instead of being just this big standard document with everything, HTML5 is divided into parts. So it's more like more separated view of HTML. So say that, okay, we need something to handle video. Okay, we call that the video module, more or less, and make it as a separate standard almost. So HTML5 is this like more dynamic standard than the rest of them. It was released in 2014, and we are now at version 5.2. If you follow the V3C line, or the World Wide Web Consortium. If you ask the What working group, that one is still active. They are working with they are doing the things together, but they are working in parallel. So there are two standards, the What working group standard and the World Wide Web Consortium standard. They say exactly the same thing. They are synced. But I think that the World Wide Web Consortium has version numbers and the What working group doesn't, because they don't think that it should be versions. It should just be a living standard. So they have like different philosophies. You can find them, the living standard you can find here on the What working groups page, and you can find V3C's version on this page. Whatever you like, you can look in whatever you like of those two. There you'll find the standard. If you have any questions, you can always go to the standard and look up your question there. However, one thing that differs a lot is back here, the web browsers corrected developers. So if you wrote something wrong, the browser tried to correct it. However, this was not regulated in a standard. So every browser could correct the user in different ways. That was a real problem for developers. So in the newer versions in HTML5, there are separate specifications. There are one for developers, this one, but there is also a specification for client developers. So if you are creating a browser, for instance, if you want to create a new browser, there is a different standard that you can apply to that says how you should handle errors as well. So, okay, if the user does this or the developer does this, you should correct it like this. So it makes it so that for a developer, it's not as hard as it was back in the 90s. It's much easier to develop web pages today. This is a page I can recommend. You will probably use it a lot. I do. There's the pointer. caniuse.com. And I mean, back here, if you were to develop web pages in the early 2000s or in the 90s, web browser compatibility was a real issue. How to make a web page look the same in every browser. It's not that difficult anymore to make the web page look the same, because that standard is set. All modern browsers implement it in the same way. However, the new thing right now is to use APIs in the browser. So we have the mobile phones, for instance. Okay, can I access the battery status? Can I access the camera, the gyroscope? How about creating VR or AR experiences for the phone? That requires the phone to show APIs to the browser so that we as web developers can use those APIs. If you're developing applications for Android in Java, you have direct access to those APIs, because that is like those APIs get released with the hardware, more or less. However, on the web, that must be standardized in some way so that it will work the same on Android, iPhone, whatever. So they are a little bit behind in time, but the APIs are getting to web developers as well. But that poses a problem. Okay, can I use this API? Which browsers will support it, for instance? And this page is perfect for this. So WebSockets, for instance, this protocol. If I search for WebSocket, we get up a view of which browsers support WebSockets. Today it's all except Opera Mini, but Opera Mini, it's such a special case. It's used mainly where you have really poor connection to the internet and it's on feature phones, it's not smartphones. So you could regard that one. It's a special case. But you can see here that, okay, WebSockets are supported in all major browsers on all major platforms. And you can go back in time if you, I think, show all, yeah. You can see how the support has grown. So, okay, we are going to need to support Internet Explorer 9. Oh, that's a problem. We can't use WebSockets. So you can use this page for checking API, checking which APIs you can use or which CSS techniques, for instance, you can use. And I will get back to that. The big problem today, if we look at this one, oh, where date relate, isn't that one? No. So, if you were the developer for 10 years ago, the big problem was Internet Explorer, or 5 years ago even. It's not today because you can more or less, if you're not a special case, you can more or less don't care about Internet Explorer, soon at least. Which one of those browsers do you think will cause you the most headache today? If you had to guess. Safari. Which one? This one or for mobile? Mobile. Any other guesses? Edge. Yeah, maybe Edge, but Edge, I mean, Microsoft has done a really good job in supporting new standards. They are on their toes right now, and they are doing a lot of good work. So often it's not Edge. It is iOS, for Safari for iOS. And in Sweden today, which browser do you think is the biggest one on the mobile market? iOS, Safari. So we're kind of back 10 years ago when everybody was using Internet Explorer, but now they are using iOS for Safari, and Apple is kind of acting as Microsoft did 10 years ago. They are slow, they are like, oh, well, we will see, maybe we'll release it in a year or two, I don't know. So if you will get a problem, it will be with iOS on Safari. But we'll get back to that, unfortunately. Okay. So, time to get started with the code. When you write HTML, I said you can just write hello world in a document, in a text document, and open it in a browser, and it will say hello world. However, that is not the correct way of doing it. You should, as developers, should tell the browser that I am a developer, I know what I'm doing, so I will write the code for you. This is a minimal HTML document. It's not really. You could skip a lot of things here and still comply to standard, but I would argue that this is what you should at least write. And I will break it down for you. So starting at the top, we have the doc type. The doc type kind of tells the browser that you are a developer. That was kind of the meaning with the doc type in the beginning. Because back when we had amateur developers that just tried to get things working, and real developers, the browser needed a way to separate the good from the bad. And they did that by utilizing something called doc type switching, or a doc type. So, for instance, Microsoft, I will bash Microsoft a lot on this lecture, but I redeemed myself and said that they are actually doing good work right now. But if I should borrow this window, which is kind of ironic when it comes to Microsoft. Is it in picture? No, but if I do it like that, almost, whoa, I need to move it all the way here. Okay. So you are developing web pages, and you are supposed to do a box on the web page. And you specify the width of the box. If this is the box, who, and you need to raise your hands, would argue that the width of the box is this one? Okay? Who would argue that the width of the box is this one? Yeah, most of you. And you who didn't raise your hand, what's your definition? Is it like in the middle? Yeah, this is kind of the logical way of looking at it. Okay, this is the width of the box. However, the HTML standard said that this is the width of the box. What do you think the Microsoft engineers did? They said, that's kind of quirky. We say that the width of the box is this one in Internet Explorer. Okay, so if you develop the web page and set the width to 100, in some browsers 100 would be this one, and in some it would be this one. So the width of the box would differ depending on which browser you watched it in. And I mean, okay, I can agree with the engineers that this is the logical way, but this was the standard. So to get rid of this problem, when a real developer used the pages, the real developer wanted to use the standard, this width. And if you added a doc type to your page, the browser would know that, okay, this is a real developer, we will render the page according to standard. And Microsoft implemented that as well. So that Internet Explorer had these two modes it switched between. So if it was a legacy page where you wanted the width to be this, you didn't add a doc type, and it was rendered like that. And in other modes, it was rendered like this. And the doc type did that for you. So that's why it's important to always add a doc type to your pages, especially in older browsers, because it will trigger something called quirks mode if you don't. And if you're in quirks mode, a lot of quirky things will happen. And you will look at the standard and you will implement it, and it will not be the same as in the standard. So by adding this one, you will trigger quirks mode in the browser. You will trigger standard mode in the browser, and you will be coding according to standard. In newer browsers, this is not a problem, but in certain versions of Firefox and Internet Explorer, this is a must. Add it first in your document, like this. Less than bang doc type space HTML. Okay, that's just something you need to learn, or be really good at copying and pasting. But I mean, if you looked at the doc type back in the 2008, the doc type was like 300 characters, mixed big and uppercase, lowercase. If you wrote one letter wrong, you triggered quirks mode. So then I argued that you should copy doc type. In this case, you could probably learn it by heart. Okay, the next, no. Is it? Oh, yeah, of course. So we need some just terminology before we continue. So when talking about HTML, there are certain concepts we need to be aware of, certain words. Many of you have heard the expression tag, an HTML tag. And a tag is this one. It looks the same as in XML. And that's because it comes from the SGML standard. So you have something called a start tag, this first one, and an end tag. That is how you mark up things. You place the thing you want to mark up between the start tag and the end tag. In this case, the EM is emphasize, that we want to emphasize something. In this case, the HTML word in this sentence. If you were to do this in a word processor, you would probably mark the word HTML and press the italic. That's kind of the same, but not really. But this will emphasize the HTML word like that. And I will get back to emphasizing. Okay? This, the whole shebang with the content in the middle and the tag, it's called an element. an HTML element. So we have tags, put the tag together with the content, and we got an element. You are probably familiar with the word attribute, because you have attributes on objects, or properties you might call them. An attribute or a property is written inside of the start tag always, just as a name. In this, those are predefined, so class is a predefined keyword, equals more. So you add a property to the tag. In this case, we add the class property and assign it more. So properties, you do it like that. Yeah, it says attribute value in the end, but property value or attribute value, it's that one. Okay, klart som korvspad. Hopp. Good. Let's start. So we have the doc type. Now we need to specify that this is an HTML document. So we have a root element. In XML you call it a root element. We have a root element called HTML. It just says that, okay, this is an HTML document. I mean, we could have other types of document, but this is an HTML document. We tell with the property or attribute lang that this page content is written in English. So if the content of the page is Swedish, you write SV instead. This is the main language of the page. Of course, you can mix languages on a page, but you often have one main language. Is the main language English, or is it Swedish? If you have a quote later on in Swedish, you could just mark that quote as being Swedish. Why do we do that? Well, accessibility reasons. So if you have a screen reader that reads the page for a blind person, it's important for the screen reader to know which language the page is written in, because it will apply different voices or read up for different languages. It could have been important for search engines to know what language, so that, okay, we might prioritize Swedish pages in Sweden. However, this has been so misused so that Google will not touch it, I think. It will just look at the content and make its own judgment if this is Swedish or English. But, I mean, it could look at it if it wanted. And that is the HTML tag that embodies everything else, or encapsulates everything else. Inside of the HTML element, we have a head portion and a body portion. So HTML, head, and body. Simple as that. The head is things that are not visible on the page. It could be things like the title that is shown in the browser bar. It could be things like which character set is being used, which resources are being loaded, things that are not directly visible to the user. Inside of the body, we have the content of the page. I might even have, oh, sorry, I haven't switched. That, sorry. So the head, the title, as I said, the meta char set, the character set. The character set is like how the characters on the page are encoded when you write them in your editor. So if you open like Eclipse or some other editor and save a page, a text file, it will encode all characters using a char set. We often use UTF-8 as a Unicode character set right now. However, different operating systems and different environments might implement other character sets. We have something called ISO 8859-1, which equals Windows 1252. Yeah. And this is just different ways of encoding the characters. I would recommend you all to use UTF-8 and make sure that the editor you will use also saves your documents using UTF-8. For Swedish students, it's a simple test. It's just to write in the body or Swedish characters if they come out as like gibberish or question marks or whatever, you have a mismatch between the character set you are using in the development tool and what you have specified here. And then you need to change it, either here or in the development tool. However, A to Z, 0 to 9, those characters are often on the same place in several different character sets. So you will not see a difference there. It's when you use special characters that are special for a certain language that you will have trouble. And I get, how many of you have Swedish letters in your first or last name? Yeah, some of you. And you have probably many times added like those letters in form fields, and then you get a ticket and it's just gibberish because somewhere on the line someone messed up with the character sets. So that is quite usual. Okay, the body, this one, you add the content. So whatever you write here between the body start and the body end, that will be shown on the web page. Simple as that. Okay, what to add in the body? So, what we need to know about HTML is that everything will be divided into blocks. So, if you add a headline, a header, just like you do in Word, you get the same kind of result. You will get a new line feed in the end, and this header will fill from left to right, fill the whole page in a box. And this is called a box model when it comes to HTML. This model has been redone when we are in HTML5. It's a completely new model. However, this base model still works, and this is actually the only thing that is important when you develop in practice. If you want to go down deeper in the theory, you can have a look at the new model, but it's no use. You need to know what a block element and an inline element is. That's what you need to know. So a block element is this one, like headers, like paragraphs, like list elements, they all make out boxes. But if you use, for instance, the EM tag that we looked at, the emphasize tag, like this, that will skew all the letters, make them italic, that is not a block element. It would be ridiculous, right? You have this paragraph, and then you want something that is emphasized, and it will be on a new line and a new box. That wouldn't make sense. So those are called inline elements, if you underline or if you make something strong or things like that. Links, for instance, is an inline element. I mean, you can have a link inside of a block. So you need to know the difference between block and inline elements and which ones are those, which is which type. It's often quite natural because inline element, you will get inline elements when you need inline elements and block elements when you need block elements. But typical block elements are the headers, header 1 to 6, the paragraph tag that makes a paragraph, or the div tag. Div is just a generic block element. It doesn't say anything about what the content is. It's just a container or a generic type. So divs are those, like, you can use them to block things in logical boxes, if you like. Inline elements are like image, A, EM, strong, underline, U, oh, whatever. Okay, but we want something like this. We want some kind of structure on our web page, and we do that by just moving boxes. And you move those boxes using CSS, and we're not using CSS yet, but we want something like this. If we do a simple mock-up on a paper of a web page, we will probably start out by, okay, we want the header, we want the menu, we want some content, we we need articles, so we need like this and that. And we will end up with something like this. And it's a good start, because then we have our main blocks of our page. This is how you did it back in HTML4. The problem with this was that, okay, we add a div. This is a div with, let's see if I have, yeah. So this is a div, just a container, and we set an ID just so we know what this is. And we set the ID header, because this is the header. And then we make a div here, and we name it nav, so we know this is the navigation. In Sweden, you often see menu, or menu in English. And this is the content, and here we have news, and this is just something else. This was the way good developers structured the pages. The problem with this approach is semantics. Because if a computer looks at this page, like a search engine, and try to like structure this page and see what is important, it's really, really hard for the computer to know what is the navigation, what is the header of the page, what is the content of the page. Because, I mean, in this case it says content. In Sweden it could say like innehåll, main, M, whatever. So it's really hard to like make computers look at this page and see the semantics. And this is what was addressed in HTML5. So in HTML5, a lot of new elements was added to add semantics to web pages. So if we look at this structure in HTML5, and this is how you're supposed to do it now, you will see that we have a tag called header. We have a tag called nav. We have a tag called main, article, aside, section, and so on. So they added a lot of semantic tags to the language. Now when Google or any other search engine looks at this page, it will immediately know that, okay, this is the header of the page, this is the main content, and this is the navigation. And it's really easy to write a crawler that will like index this page, use the navigation to navigate to the next one when you're finished, and so on. It will know that, okay, a side is like side information. It's related information, but it's not important for the page. So we could just skip things that are written here. I'm not sure. I don't think. Oh well, I have. Okay, so if we I mean, now everything is. This is 3 columns and everything is nice. In practice, this will be the header, and then the nav will be here, and then the main will be here, and then the aside will be in the bottom, because we haven't added any CSS yet. I think I have an example of that soon. So the structure, if we look in the code, in the body, this is just the body. I have excluded the header and the HTML, but you should always include it when you write your code. In this case, we have added the header, the nav, the main, the aside, and inside the main we have each article. And the article is a separate, like, the easiest thing is to think of a news page. Each article is its own separate story, more or less. You can look at articles as something that you could always republish somewhere else in its the entire part of the article. You should just be able to lift it from your page and include it somewhere else, and it should be enough. So an article is like a sub part of a page. It could be a news header, news article, of course, or it could be a blog article, or it could be something else. But it's a separate part of the page. We have grouped that inside of a main, and the aside, as I said, it could be banners for commercials, or it could be like, yeah, something that is not related to the content of this page. So this is a pretty neat structure. We have the navigation early. You could argue that it's better to have the navigation at the end. There are discussions regarding this, and accessibility for disabled. So if a screen reader reads this page and the navigation is here, it's really good for a blind person to get the navigation early, be able to do his choice, and get to the main part. However, when you get to the second page, the navigation will start read again. So some argue that it's better that the nav is at the end. However, a good screen reader should know that this is a navigation and not even read it for the user. It should just skip it. So I think this is a pretty good structure. When you start to write your HTML, it's a good thing to use something called a validator. If you're used to writing HTML, you will probably not need to. If you're new to HTML, it's quite nice to be able to if we take this page. Uh-oh. Come on. If you go to this page and you paste your address to your web page, it will validate the page for you, check it for errors, and you will get kind of a... It's like a compiler. You will get warnings and you will get errors. I have a lot of warnings in this one. It's not mine. It's the presentation tool, so I could blame someone else. But yeah, do this, because you will start off by writing the HTML, and if you do a lot of errors in that one and then try to add CSS, you will have a really hard time, because you will need to compensate for errors you did in the HTML. And then you correct the HTML and the CSS will be all messed up. So when you're kind of done with the mock-up of the HTML, just run it through the validator and fix if you have any problems, and then you could start adding CSS. And of course, this is an iterative, is it called that? Iterative model, where you alter the HTML and you alter the CSS, and the HTML and CSS, of course. But in the beginning, try to use the validator. I might have some slides left, 1 or 2, maybe. Let's see. Okay, so you will add a lot of elements. I talked about the div. P is the paragraph. You have the headers. You have the lists. You have the different semantical groups, and you have a lot of inline elements. This is pretty much those that are here. You should probably know them. Forget about the B and the I. But the other ones you could kind of learn. You will learn them if you write HTML for a while. You will learn all of those. There are many more, but those are the most important ones. I just added B and I because it was out of the standard. Because what B does is it says that something should be bold, right? Just as you mark something in a word processor and press the B, it should be bold. But bold isn't a semantical, doesn't add meaning. It just says that something should be presented in a bold font. So that is presentation. Italic, it's presentation. Those were brought out of the standard, and they added strong and EM. Strong says that something should be, if a screen reader reads something that is strong, it will probably raise its voice, because we should add a strong meaning to this word. Emphasize, I'm not even, there are a difference between emphasizing something and reading it a strong voice, but emphasize is the same thing. It's, okay, this is important, we need to emphasize this. It's not just italic. So they removed those. If you were just to do something, make text italic, you should use CSS instead. But then they added them again. And that's because of legacy reasons, because developers kept on using those. So they are there because developers kept on using them. If you are to use them, you should be able to give us the explanation of the semantic meaning of those. They have a new semantic meaning. You need to go into the standard and look at the semantic meaning. It's just a construction to make them fit in the standard. So don't use them. Use EM and strong if you need. Okay? When you start writing HTML, you do it in a in a text document, simple text document in your favorite editor. You can use Eclipse if you like. We will, in this course, recommend you to use Visual Studio Code. It's available for Mac, Linux, and Windows. We will use my examples will be. I will show my examples in Visual Studio Code, but you can use whatever editor you like. You save the text document. You publish it on GitHub. Instructions are in the exercise. And then you write your HTTP address to visit your page. And you need to publish your pages to be able to look at them. It's especially when we start to adding JavaScript. Then often you need to have a web server to be able to work with certain APIs. But in this case, you will publish the web page on the internet using GitHub. Yeah, one thing about indenting code as well. You are pretty used to indent code, not writing everything in the left margin. You should do that as well in HTML. You can always debate if you should use like 2 spaces or 4 spaces or add a tab. I think the code standard for the later assignments says 2 spaces. And you will be forced to use 2 spaces. So if you press tab, it will insert 2 spaces. But later, that's when we start using JavaScript. And this is, of course, something that is really important if you are working in a team. It's a hazard if half of the team are using tabs and half is using spaces. And I mean, you can have religious discussions about which one to use. And I promise you that you could like spend days on YouTube just like listening on arguments for and against. Oh, skip that one, skip that. Yeah, well, HTML comments. You can do comments in the HTML code. You do it like this. You cannot use the /star comments that you're used to. You need to do it like this in HTML. What you need to be aware of, if you write a comment in HTML and publish it, users will be able to see the comments if they look at the source code, of course. However, if you use a development environment, you will probably, in that development environment, set it up to remove all comments. But yeah. And the last thing, I have a lot of references on this lecture. If you go into Mozilla Developer Networks, Mozilla is really great in serving developers and giving good documentation. If you want a good documentation over HTML, like a book, more or less, visit Mozilla Developer Network. That's all you need. They have perfect documentation of everything regarding HTML and getting you started. You could use the standard, but it's quite dry reading. It's like, well, it's heavy. This is presented in a better way. HTML Rocks is a good site if you want to follow the community. V3 Schools, stay out of that. If you Google something, you will find V3 Schools. In earlier years, they had a lot of errors on their site, which made developers do things falsy. They kind of looks like they are a part of V3C, but they are not. They are like a private company just trying to earn money on you getting certificates. Stay away from V3 Schools. They are really good in search engine optimization, so they always end up in the top. If you Google something, go to Mozilla Developer Network. They are the best. Okay, so a break. And after the break, at like 1:15, we will start looking at CSS. And I want to stress as well that this lecture, there is another version on the web page. If you like, you could watch that version. In that, I talk about HTML entities, for instance. So, okay, thank you.